we are in the first plenary of the AME conference and the last plenary of the Aspire conference. And it's a great pleasure to welcome as our speaker this evening, Bill Spady. A past president of the American Education Research Association once said that as educators, we should always go to one conference a year outside our own area of interest. And for many of us, we're just too busy, that's not possible. So what we've always tried to do at the AME conference is bring someone from outside our strict medical education or healthcare professions education field to share their perspective on medical education. And tonight we have been fortunate in having with us Bill Spady. Bill Spady has been a visionary leader in relation to outcome-based education. And he's authored more than 10 books on the subject. Indeed, I remember reading his very first book on outcome-based education. And that's what inspired me to think about medical education and outcome-based education, and was behind our development of a three-circle model in Dundee. So Bill founded the Network for Outcome-Based Education. And on the conference exhibit table, you see one of the meetings that group have had recently, and there's an invitation for anyone to join the telephone recorded version of that meeting and hear the views of 13 experts on outcome-based education. So there's a leaflet on the leaflet stand. But Bill has lectured in countries around the world and is in great demand as a speaker. And we're delighted, Bill, that you've agreed to join us today and to share with us some of your experience and thoughts about this important subject of outcome or competency-based education. So can we give Bill a big welcome?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ron. Well, colleagues, I am deeply honored to be part of this event, both here in Lyon and, hello, Ottawa. To be simultaneously communicating with both groups. Given the history of this organization, given the mission, the paradigmatic mission shift that Dr. Harden has just represented to you, I'm grateful to be part of it, and I will say I'm going to challenge you. The title of my presentation came to me 25 years ago when I was asked by a national ministry to do a seminar on assessment. And I declined, and they insisted, so I declined some more. And this went on for some time until I finally had a title. And I agreed. That was the title of my presentation. That was the one slide that I showed at the presentation. It was the conclusion of the presentation, okay? And needless to say, a lively discussion ensued for approximately 30 seconds until they admitted they really didn't want to know how to assess outcomes. They wanted to know how outcome-based education grades students. And I said, oh, well, I can tell you about that. Really? Yeah. In pencil. Oh, in pencil. Not in ink? No. Why? Because ink ends opportunity to show improvement. And that's what this is all about. Outcome-based education is about constant, continuous improvement. And it's also about outcomes. So the subtitle is about climbing the evolutionary mountain. And I must say that the evolutionary mountain of OBE consists of 4 dimensions. Now, when we began, I'm going to call it 55 years ago, there was only one dimension, cognitive learning. That's all there was. And we soon learned, well, cognitive learning it's just what happens in your head. So what do people do with what happens in their head? And the answer was, we don't know. If they have enough in their head, presumably it will translate. And that wasn't good enough. Well, we generated a second dimension. It's called competence. Competence is what you can do with what's going on in your head, and competence means to demonstrate it. Okay? Tangible demonstration. Then we realized, oh, that's not enough, because every time you do something, you do it somewhere. And somewhere can be incredibly different from situation to situation and place to place. And there are kinds of somewheres, i.e. challenges that you face all the time, that are so challenging that it exceeds, that is, to address them, exceeds your competence. So we don't even know what competence is till we know the context in which you have to demonstrate the competence and the cognition. Well, that brought us eventually, and this is where I want to start with you as a grounding. I believe that this thing I'm calling complex configurations is not just an individual competence. It is clusters and configurations and constellations of competence that endure over time and that can be met in a whole variety of contexts. Those are called role performances or performance roles. And I believe, humble belief, that is really the essence of medical education. And I'm going to challenge you, rise to the occasion, because it's not exactly what you think. I think med ed inherently, and I'm going to say ideally, resides there. Let's see. So you have two conference themes. And when Dr. Hardin invited me to present, he said, we're going to give you a half an hour and you present the 50 years of work. And I said, okay, no problem. Well, I discovered the two conference themes. In Lyon, it's redefining health professions. Well, we've been redefining what outcomes are, and therefore what outcome-based education is, for over 4 decades, And in Ottawa, it's about reimagining assessment across the continuum. So I'm inviting you to collaborate in a 4D. 4D is our baseline. A 4D approach to redefining and reimagining medical education. Now, what I'm going to show you here are a bunch of words that are all equivalent 4D words. So when you see them, things called performance roles, things called criterion defined, things called transformational OBE, things called operations-based expertise, which is an OBE, all right? And something that Benjamin Bloom called formative assessment with continuous evolution of the learning. Those are going to all be equivalent terms in this 4D grounding. So when you see any of those words in any of the slides, and by the way, this is being recorded. I'm going to talk fast because it's hard to do 50 years of work in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, because it's all about outcomes. It's all about what we mean by an outcome. So MedEd's defining paradigm, I am calling operations, okay, there's the O word, okay, not medical operations and surgical operations, operations that are organized sets of purposeful actions, active processes, organized sets of them. The word based has meant defined by, focused on, aligned with, and organized around ever since we invented the term outcome-based education. And you know all expertise. You know all about expertise. So I believe your OBE, bottom line, starting point, should be operations-based expertise. The ability to do these things called performance roles. Notice, expertise is not permanent. It evolves. Okay? Expertise lasts sometimes weeks and months in certain fields as new information, new knowledge, new cutting-edge things happen. Now, this OBE, this 4D OBE, abounds in the real world. It just doesn't abound in education. Okay, 200,000 years ago, humans learned to survive using the fundamentals of OBE. But karate instruction and belts, scuba instruction and levels, flight schools, scouting merit badges, all these things you see on the screen, parenting but with no certificates, okay? They're all operations-based expertise, and notice how many on that list were essentially about life and death, scuba diving, pilots, etc. This is serious stuff. So, this transformational OBE, okay, was thriving on the planet, in the world, until along came the industrial age and our devotion to linear time. It overwhelmed us. Now, almost overnight, education got big and bureaucratic, and it got modeled after factory assembly lines. It also got standardized, institutionalized, static, impersonal, academic, and selective. And its essence, education's essence, is time-based. It's not outcome-based. It's not learning-based. Everything in education is defined is the major thing that is cultivated, that is assessed, and that is credentialed. Hence, the word applied has almost died. Okay? Applied is for people who just aren't cognitively smart enough. Well, say that to a surgeon, they might disagree. Hence, okay, I've given a name. This, you don't look for it in the dictionary. I call this one-dimensional EDUCENTRISM. And almost all of your new students have had 16 years of one-dimensional EDUCENTRISM. I'm willing to guess that everybody in this room has as well, not just your students. That's the system we've been in. Now, I think if we're going to be serious about 4D transformational OBE, we need to address 4 incredible conditions. Number 1, modern education is caught in time boxes. Okay? Credentials are counterfeit. Credentialing controls everything. So therefore, okay, we're dealing with non-outcome credentialing, and outcomes aren't really outcomes and often don't last past graduation. They're just things we learn in the curriculum until we forget them. Now, transformational OBE shows that credentialing is counterfeit. Credit is a contrived numbers game. Folks, I do day-long workshops on just this slide. We pretend everything is worth points and numbers, and that all the points are equal, and then we add up and average the points for totally dissimilar kinds of learning, and we pretend that the points are the learning. And then we add them up and we average them, and we add them up and we average them. And by averaging the points, we can compound the distortion by generating a GPA, which is just a mishmash of everything. We compute it to 3 decimal places so that we can more precisely rank students. Now, what do we do to do all of that? We assess students. And we assess students using numbers and points and scores and percents and averages and ratios. And they're all counterfeit. Okay? They're all counterfeit. Outcome-based education is about substance. And that was the challenge we faced from day one. Because people don't want to deal with substance. It's too easy to just throw numbers and scores and percents and ratios at the learning, whatever the learning is, and pretend that if you get a high score, oh, you must have learned essential knowledge. In the workshop I give on this, I prove that no paper-pencil test ever has been a test of essential knowledge. It's all a fiction. Now, our good friend Benjamin Bloom, who you know because of the taxonomy of cognitive objectives, everything in your head, okay, he challenged educentrism way back 55 years ago. I was introduced to his work before it ever got published. Okay? Now, to understand his mastery learning model, which is an instructional model, okay, these first 3 things that you see, okay, criterion-defined standards means words define the standard, no bell curve grading, and clear and higher expectations for student performance. Those 3 things created a first constellation variable. The second critical factor in Bloom's model is we needed a curriculum and teaching that would establish and teach the prerequisites, the true prerequisites that led to ever more complex learning. Okay? And when we examine those things now in our work, it's just unbelievable how that is violated. And the third critical factor in Bloom's model, he called it formative assessment, where the assessment had to directly match the criterion standard. Okay, directly matched, that's what aligned meant in our world. Okay, formative meant preliminary, diagnostic, let's see how they're doing, and we would, quote, grade that in pencil because we're going to provide targeted assistance using a different instructional approach because the first one didn't seem to work so well. Give them an expanded opportunity or a second chance, and lo and behold, way more students learned way more stuff. What a shock and amazement. So to put this in a package, just in one constellation, what outcome-based was in those days with Bloom's mastery model. And by the way, everything we called outcome-based education for 18 years was nothing but mastery learning. All right? But what it was all about is expanding the conditions of success. And those three things did it. Now, it took us 18 years to come to the realization that we were caught in the numbers game. Even though we used criterion standards and tried to do all these things so well and align things, we were still, and I'm going to say mastery learning was totally caught in this myth called, well, if the students get 80, they've mastered something. And we had to say, we don't want the pilot of our airplane getting 80 on landing. Okay? This doesn't work. Now, culminating, outcome was a culminating demonstration. That was our definition. A team of 3 brilliant high school teachers and I came up with this definition, or I was going to quit because 80 was fiction. Well, culminating meant, how good can it get by the end? And that's the challenge I want to pose to you. Not how did they do it during the term, how did they do it during whatever the time block is. The question is, how good can they do it? Ultimately, till you can't keep them there any longer. How good? And since outcomes were about words, not numbers, there was nothing to average. You couldn't average in all the mistakes students were making while learning how to do it well. You only looked at what's the final result that's going to walk out the door, and we wanted it to get out the door. Secondly, demonstrations. Demonstrations meant tangible actions, just what the words say. I mean, all of this is face validity, not just mental processing. And we had, the battles we had to fight to get teachers to realize that just because they were using Bloom's taxonomy and teaching to higher levels of mental complexity didn't mean that the students could do anything. That was absolutely different. Outcomes had to be driven by, we called them action verbs. We called them demonstration verbs. And every time we had to learn, every time you change the verb, you're changing the outcome, even if all the other words stay the same. Because describing is different from explaining, is different from designing, is different from producing, is different from think of the words. Those are different performances. Well, a breakthrough happened. 2 years later, we realized, yes, outcomes aren't just the things that teachers do and with students in class. All the stuff you see on the screen right now, the structured tasks and discrete skills, outcomes take different, increasingly more complex forms. So this is where we reached the point where, if you've read any of my work, it was about transformational OBE. Well, the transformational stuff happened up there in that upper sector of this first mountain. The things, this is getting ahead of the program. The things you see up in the red sector, this is where my sociological background, not my psychological training, my sociological background gave me this system orientation and these words about performance roles, life roles, etc. So I think medical education is about complex performance roles. That's where 4D exists. That's where transformation exists. That's the transformational part of the mountain. That's where operations-based expertise lives, is in that top sector. Now, within a year of creating and discovering, I'll say, this mountain, we developed something called the life performance wheel. Okay? You are looking in the mirror. You are looking in the mirror. To be an effective professor, to be an effective parent, to be an effective leader, to be an effective anything adult, you need to be good at these performance roles. And Bloom's taxonomy, out of which I derived this, only gives us the bottom half of the wheel. The top half of the wheel is all what Daniel Goleman, the genius who created and the concept of emotional intelligence, it's what he called interpersonal competence. Interpersonal, between people. So all of the performance roles you see at the top of the wheel, you can't do by yourself. Other human beings are required to learn them, to practice them, to demonstrate them, to assess them. Okay? Other human beings are required. Now, within 2 years, a miracle happened. Okay? It's this framework. This framework happened, I could say, totally by accident. Let's call it divinely inspired or guided. It just came in totally by accident as I was working with a school district in the United States who wanted to do future-focused outcomes. Because the outcomes hadn't been future-focused. They were curriculum-focused. All right? So this framework, self-directed learners, collaborative workers, you see the words, complex thinkers, etc. This template of having a qualitative attribute, okay, the words in black, with a performance role, learners, workers, thinkers, contributors, etc., it got answered. It took off like wildfire. I developed it with a team of people, 40 people. Okay, it came to us, okay, on, I think it was a Tuesday. That night, I was meeting with a different school district. They wanted the framework. I said, you can't have the framework. You can only have the template. You can only have the template because we had to answer the question. So here we go to the point of the presentation about assessment. How would you know a self-directed learner if you saw one? How would you know a quality producer if you saw one? What does a complex thinker do that convinces you, oh, I'm looking at one now. They do this, and they do this, and they do this, and they do this. That's what makes them a self-directed learner. And we just sort of intuitively understood that's what was needed. So the outcome was essentially about a human being with qualities. Self-directed, okay, quality, community contributor. Okay? So the answer to this was, well, and then whatever the quality is goes in there where the black word attribute is. Well, a self-directed learner does this and does this and does this and does this because that's what makes it. That's where the performance is. So let me emphasize this because I'm going right, whoops. I'm sorry. Come on, come back, machine, hello. See, I love technology. There you go. Okay. This is an exacting, difficult process. We call them the does this. Those are essential performance components. They are words. They are what you do to configure and put together a complex performance role. This is what it takes. Now, we eventually realized one adjective and one noun was too limiting, and we did all kinds of experimental work with this as we were doing this process all over the US and Canada. And as soon as people saw this, it's like, this is what we should be doing. The school district that saw that framework said, it doesn't matter what their grades are, it doesn't matter what the courses are, it doesn't matter what the class rank is, it doesn't matter what the GPA is. If they're not a self-directed learner, quality producer, etc., they're going to have a very unhappy future. So that's the template we were using. Now, if we wanted to assess any of those things, any of those attributes, okay, this is, we're going to use, I'm going to develop with you here, okay, a formative assessment rubric, and that rubric is going to identify and prioritize what's essential, okay? It is going to assess your 4D, now there's a lot of stuff in this one, EPC, essential performance components. It's going to assess them with some operational facts. And I'll give you that in the next slide. Okay? Now, it's going to embrace the criterion-defined paradigm. In other words, words are going to define what we want the learner to be able to do. We're going to identify and address specific strengths and weaknesses and limitations in the demonstration, because that's what formative assessment does. We're going to provide students with substantive feedback, not numbers. Doesn't do you any good to say you got 85, because the question is 85 of what? And, come back, please. We're going to provide, we're all in one rubric, we're going to provide a progress chart of improvement. Now, here's an idea. I used to be a symphony musician, so I used a symphony performance as my example. Okay, if I wanted to see a professional level demonstration, what did I want that demonstration to be? And by the way, it doesn't matter if it's music or it's anything else. I don't want a surgeon stopping in the middle of an operation and saying, just a minute, I know somewhere in this textbook there's this thing about what you're supposed to do. So, number one, the F word, I chose fluency. Maybe some other F word would be appropriate to you. This is not gospel. I chose accuracy for the A word. I chose challenge, context challenge and complexity. I chose challenge for the C word, thoroughness for the T word, and synergy for the S word. There are other possibilities for FACTS, but the reason I want you to have some framework of FACTS is because our rubric is going to assess, now this is for any given essential performance component, okay? Any part of the demonstration we're looking for, all right? What's the fluency? What's the accuracy? What's the challenge, etc.? And I'm going to challenge you as medical educators, what you want is professional level demonstrations and performances. And you're not going to get them all at one time. Okay? So I'm going to pretend here that in every one of the 4 rows of this rubric, we are going to write words. 4. well, what does a professional level of fluency look like? What does a professional level of accuracy look like on this particular outcome, this particular EPC, etc.? Now, here's the challenge. If we were doing this based on convention, okay, we'd give 1 point to each of the cells, the 5 cells on the bottom of the matrix. We'd give 2 points for an incomplete demonstration, okay? We'd give 3 points for a competent one, and we'd say, okay, you have to reach the competent level in order to pass. But what we're really seeking is the professional level one, and so every one of those gets 5 points. Now, if we did that, okay, I'm saying don't score the rubric because it's going to give you misleading results. Utilize your criteria instead. Now, in that matrix, in that rubric, the typical scoring range is from 5 to 20. Now, there are 5 ways to get 19. So if you got 20, okay, you'd get you'd get an A plus, okay. If you got 19, they'd say it's wonderful, but it isn't fully professional yet because one of the 5 things isn't getting 4 points. Now, this is where things really start to get rough, because there are 15 ways to get an 18, and an 18 would give you a high grade, except 5 of those 15 ways is at the inadequate scoring level. It's a 2. So I wouldn't pass. I couldn't say to the student, you pass this demonstration if we're looking at substance. But if we're looking at numbers, oh my gosh, you passed, it's wonderful. Now, if you want the really bad news, there's 35 ways to get a 17. Now, we might give a 17, okay, a B or a B minus or who knows what, but the point is we have no idea what the 35 possible combinations is even about. So, you can't assess what you haven't defined. We're going to define performance outcomes that have essential performance components, and here's how we would assess them. Now, by the way, first trial, second trial, third trial, it doesn't matter how many trials per se the student does. We keep filling in the boxes and the cells of the matrix till it's full, as good as it can get. Now, we need a factual record-keeping and reporting system. Okay? No permanent records. Okay? What we call them is open transcripts. The matrix itself serves as an open transcript. Complement that with something called a performance portfolio, and complement that with, and this was one of the most brilliant ideas that my colleagues came up with. For first grade students, have the student, instead of report cards, have the students come in with the parents, and the students will describe to the parents what they've accomplished during these last 6 weeks, what they're still working on, how much they've improved, how they still need to improve, what they're going to work on next, because they know how it's all organized in an outcome-based system. Okay? That's called student-led conferencing. If we did that in graduate school, and we had been doing that for 12 years, wow, students wouldn't be nervous about coming to an employer and saying, boy, here's what I can do. And here's what I know, and here's what I've worked on, and these are my strengths. Bang, bang, bang. Now, everything changed. OBE absolutely changed, and I'm going to conclude with this. Okay? Things totally changed because the mountain, we realized there were clouds covering the peak. So there's a 5D peak. And at the 5D peak, see, what education doesn't want to touch, what education doesn't want to deal with, is a universe of what I call self-potentials. Up on that peak, we found dozens of innate capacities that don't get addressed, and a whole network of evolutionary OBEs. That is, the mountain really evolves when we take a look at those. So, I conclude with this. The universe of self-potentials. What don't we really cultivate and develop? Okay? It's called self-empowerment. That's what self-directed learners is. Learners who take charge of their own learning. Thank you, Dr. Harden. Self-exploration, self-discovery, self-regulation of your biological processes. Self-assessment. You know how you're doing if you have criteria and you really are attuned to how your body functions, which leads to self-healing. And what we absolutely can't possibly touch because it's totally embarrassing and everything else is self-love. Because if you don't love yourself, you're not going to engage in any of those. You're going to live the life of a victim where everybody is doing it to you instead of you being in charge of it. Now, we got to the top of the mountain and we discovered, okay, our empowering human nature. I mean, every one of these things I'm showing you is a seminar in itself, a major one in itself. Our 25 intelligences, our 10 plus resilient capacities, a natural learning process. Oh, how do people, children included, how do they learn when they're not in school, but they learn? What is that process? What are those factors, etc.? I worked with the creator of that model for 3 years. It's absolutely brilliant. Our 5 ever-evolving well springs of empowerment and human fulfillment. That framework has reached continent after continent, and people love it. Our quantum and cosmic essence, I'm going to talk about that tomorrow morning in workshop. Our epigenetic capacities, our higher consciousness, all of that. And there's a whole bunch of OBEs. There's opportunity-based expansion, ownership-based empowerment, there's options-based exploration, openness-based enlightenment, okay, and the granddaddy of them all, oneness-based embodiment. Really recognizing that as a human community, we are all one and living it that way. So many, many, many of these things are in my book, Outcome-Based Education's Empowering Essence. It's a paperback. You can get it online. Okay? So I thank you, and an invitation. If you're interested, tomorrow sessions 2T and 4N, you'll find them in the program. I have a much more extensive version of this on the website. Oh, I had my email, okay. My website, William Spady, okay, williamspady.com. A whole presentation about all of this that you can access. Thank you, thank you. Sorry I ran over time. Ron.
Thank you, Bill, for a provocative and interesting presentation. We have time for a couple of questions. Jason will moderate any if we're online, and I'll look at if there are 4 microphones, 2 here and 2 at the upper level. If you have a question, please go to one of the microphones. Perhaps while we're doing that, is there anything?
I can kick us off, Ron.
Yeah, and there's do you want to take that one online there?
Sure. Can I get this mic? Thank you. Hi everybody, my name's Jason Frank, and Bill, I was invited up because Ron knows that I'm the founder of an OBE consortium in MedEd. So it's a pleasure to meet you. You inspired our work.
Well, hey.
Listen, the first question online is, how would you compare EPCs and EPAs? And I'm not sure if you've been introduced to EPAs.
No, I have not, so tell me an EPA.
So that one's going to be tricky for you to answer. So an entrustable professional activity. Many people in this room have been working on this as an educational technology or a technique or an approach, and it's very similar perhaps to EPCs. And what it is articulating true tasks of a profession and using them as a scaffold for learning and assessment conversations. Is that related?
Yeah, it sounds related to me, okay? But the difference I can talk about is that once we have defined, I'm going to call it the kind of human being we want to send out the door, the self-directed learner, or whatever it turns out to be, these are so what we're defining, the EPCs are to embody that, okay? It sounds like the essential professional components, attributes that you have are sort of related, but I'd love to see the grounding of those to answer the question more accurately.
We need to introduce you to somebody named Ole Tenkate who's here. There are microphones if people want to go to them. And just before we go to a mic, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So Larry Cuban talks about change without reform. And you've been leading reform of education for decades. Do you have any advice for us on how to make real transformative change, these conversations?
Yes. Number one, reform in the OBE world is absolutely artificial. What we've seen in the United States in the name of reform is nothing but doing EDUCENTRISM better. Okay? Test scores go up, okay, we hope. We control the curriculum. We tell you what to teach, how to teach, what's going to be on the test, because this illusion of high test scores presumably means that we're sending, okay, fulfilling, empowered people into the world, and we're not. It is 1D, educentric accountability is what it is. All right, so reform has a very bad name. As I was planning my presentation, I took a whole slide out that were all of the pseudo terms used by reformers, pretending that, oh, just grab this word and it means reform, and none of it gets us to transform. Okay?
I see we have a number of questions, but I think we'll probably have to move on now. And there will be other times during the meeting, and the expert session of the workshop, to ask Bill some questions.
Let me answer that.
He wants to answer one here. There's one come online.
Please.
And it's, how do you reconcile or apply outcome-based education with or to selection admission standards? 1 minute, Bill.
1 minute, yeah, I know. I will keep this to 1 minute if I possibly can. What is on the transcripts you get? What constitutes the GPA that constitutes the class rank that you want for your students? Because you only want the brightest and best. This man I mentioned, who did emotional intelligence, wrote an amazing book called Working with Emotional Intelligence that nobody has read, it seems, okay? And in that book, he's saying, oh, we hire all the high IQ people, and after 5 years, their high IQ knowledge is obsolete. So if they're not continuous learners, if they don't stay on the cutting edge, and if they don't have the interpersonal and intrapersonal attributes they need in a professional career, they're going to be a failure in the career. All right? So we're trapped by one-dimensional thinking.
Bill, thank you very much. So there will be an opportunity to talk with Bill at the reception tonight or at the scheduled session during the meeting. So finally, a big thank you to Bill for his presentation. Thank you.
I hope I get to chat some more.
And one final bit of business, we've got a very exciting AIME initiative, and that is the Student Innovation Grant. And students, Madeleine will tell briefly about this. Scholar X have kindly supported the funding for this. So Madeleine, I can ask Madeleine Patricio, who chairs the committee, to announce the winners for the 2022 Student Innovation Grant.
Thank you, Han. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here to report on such demanding and exciting initiative. How to move the slides, my God. Han.
Yes,
Here? Where? There? Okay. So, the Student Initiative Grant provided jointly by AIME and Scholar X to promote improvements in medical education and learning resource around the world in collaboration with students. It's all about students, designed to support students-led initiatives. This year, more than 40 submissions were received. The 4 top best projects moved to implementation. After 5 months, they provided a final report, and it was based on those final reports after implementation that the winner was selected. Sorry. I'm very proud to announce the winner project was entitled First Steps in Medical Practice, and it was submitted by Elena Verico and Nini from the Tbilisi State Medical, Georgia. Bravo! Bravo! This was the great news for 2022, but I have great news also for 2023. Do you want to guess what? The great news is that we will have 2 SIGA Students Initiative Grant Initiative Awards. And why? One for countries with more resources, and also a second award for countries less resources. So this was possible to AIME and Scholar X. And now great thanks to the Working Committee, Nicola Kiepert, Madeleine Mendeich, Irene Matkar, for the work they did in moving this project award, moving this project further. And also, and mainly, to AIME and Scholar X, because without them, it would not have been possible, as the students did, to bring 64 students that have had no practice opportunities to hospitals where they were under practice. They have more, and then again, more 40 waiting. And the best thing is that they will be continuing sustaining this project without funding. I also want to say that they will be presenting during this conference next Tuesday, August 30 at 2:30. Please come and see them, and bravo for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Madalena. Tracy just tells me there's been a huge number of questions online triggered by Bill's presentation. So what we're going to do is we're going to put these on swap card, and we're going to ask Bill if he doesn't mind answering them online on swap card, and others can see the questions and the answers at the same time. So that will be in the next few days.